Hello and welcome to Maiden, Matriarch with me, Louise Perry. My guest today is the journalist Nellie Bowles, columnist at the Free Press and author of the new book, The Morning After the Revolution, Dispatches from the Wrong Side of History, in which Nellie recounts her journey from being a orthodox liberal journalist at the New York Times to becoming an apostate, basically, cast into the outer darkness. We spoke about why apostates get such a hard time, but also why progressive ideas are often very wrong, and often confrontations with reality can cause all sorts of harm. We spoke about homelessness, about the anti-policing campaign, and in the extended version we also spoke about transgenderism and why that's such a big deal in the culture war. That extended version of the episode is available at louiseperry.substack.com, where you can also find, as always, the whole back catalogue of extended episodes, the bonus episodes I do with my husband, and also the MMM chat community. Enjoy. Many of you will know that Christianity is a subject of fascination for me, and the role of Christianity in shaping the modern world is a theme I return to again and again on the podcast. My view is that we can't really understand ourselves or understand the world around us without getting to grips with it, which is why I'm very glad to put you towards a new online course called 321. It's an introduction to Christianity that's imaginative, thoughtful, engaging. It assumes absolutely no prior knowledge. It's presented by the wonderful Glenn Scrivener, who has been a guest on the MMM podcast previously, and I've also been a guest on his show. Glenn presents 8 video-led sessions, which are based around some beautiful animated stories that illustrate the Christian message. You can check it out for free at 321course.com/MMM. Just enter your email, choose a password, and you're in. There's no spam, there's no fees. Just visit 321course.com/MMM. So Nellie, tell me about how you went out to Seattle to cover the CHAZ/CHOP phenomenon.
Yes.
Which I certainly remember. I don't know if listeners will all remember. And that wasn't necessarily a very popular decision among your colleagues at the time.
No, it was not. So basically, I had been a well-liked, successful reporter at the Times, going along my business, doing what I liked doing, which was kind of doing send-ups of this and that figure. And I was covering tech. I was doing funny stories about tech leaders. I would do profiles and make a kind of a funny profile about a person. And then I was reading about what was going on in Seattle, where a group of Antifa had taken over Seattle's gay neighborhood and declared it as an autonomous zone, their own city. The police could not enter, ambulances couldn't enter. It was a new state. And not only that, but the mayor was like calling it a festival. She was saying it was like the summer of love. Everyone was like getting on board. And I thought, this is the funniest thing in the world. Like, this is insane. Like, what? And at the time, all the press I was reading was either super right-wing press that was like Antifa, take over neighborhood, destroy it, like Seattle lives at it again. Or it would be really left-wing press that was like the new, and this left-wing, I mean like NPR. It'd be like the new community garden in CHAZ, a sign of like racial equity and new utopia rising from the sidewalks. Like it was just these crazy, I was getting these crazy sort of funhouse mirror images. And so I wanted to go up there and see it. And I was a West Coast reporter focused in the business section. So I found a nice angle, which was to cover a bunch of the businesses were suing the city because obviously the city had abandoned them, and these businesses pay taxes. And they were like, we're not getting what we get. We pay taxes. We deserve a thing from you. So I started trying to pitch to go up there. And this was when I kind of first realized that it was going to be hard to cover a lot of the most interesting stories within the New York Times. And that people were willfully ignoring this. There was a reason why it was only right-wing or left-wing coverage. There's a reason why it was just sort of being ignored. And so I started pitching, and I was like kind of figuring out, is there an editor who would take a story about this? Could I like find it? And one of my colleagues found out that I was doing this, and he got very concerned. And this is basically the stuff about the Times in the book is I try to keep it pretty minimal, because I don't know about you, but I've heard like enough about New York Times 2020 reporter monologues. Like
it never gets old.
It has gotten old for me. Like I was like, I can't even write about this. Like I'm bored typing this. So, but anyways, this colleague of mine basically chastised me for wanting to pitch this and said, why do you want to cover this? It's not good to look at something like this. And you're going to go up there and you're going to write something funny about this, and you're not going to write something flattering, and it's going to be, you'll poke a few holes and you'll write about this or that. And why? And why do you want to be on the wrong side of history? And I remember just being so struck by the conversation. And I ended up going up there and writing about it. Like, kudos to my editors who ended up eventually encouraging me to go. And after that, there was basically a revolt of sorts among my colleagues, who were very upset that I'd gone and written about the lawsuit, written that there were issues happening within the Antifa utopia, and
including 2 boys getting shot, right? I mean, were you there at the time?
No, I wasn't there when they were killed.
When you were pitching, that hadn't happened, right? Yeah, so it was...
I think one had been shot and not the other yet. Okay. It was turning violent. Okay. Like, I don't think both deaths, I don't think both shootings had happened, but it had started turning dark. So I saw, you'd see these videos coming out on Twitter or whatever that were like taken late at night, and it'd be a shaky cam, and it'd be a video of a guy handing out guns to people and saying like, we're the new security here or something. Really kind of alarming stuff.
Your description of this is extremely scary. Like, basically these really like agitated young men walking around with AK-47s, kick the police out of terrorizing local shopkeepers. Like, it's just, it's really scary.
Oh yeah. Well, where there's a vacuum of power, different security forces will rise. So that's what you find time and again. And I ended up in the book going to a bunch of these autonomous zones, and different people need and want to be secure. And so once the police are not there, they will find other ways to secure themselves. And it basically looks like...
They reinvent it in some way, yeah.
Yeah, they're just like hiring... It's like the mob coming around saying, do you want your shop to be protected tonight? Like, pay us and we'll... I mean, this is human nature. Of course this is what was going to happen. But yeah, so I came back, I wrote that story, and then my colleagues started basically calling me, I mean, not just basically, literally calling me a fascist on Twitter and all this stuff that we now know of as like the sort of typical thing that happens within mainstream media when a reporter does something that's considered bad or not with the party line. And and that kind of kickstarted the book. And then I became obsessed with all these zones, of course, because my personality is just responding to that kind of, I don't know.
You lent into it.
I lent into it.
Some people would have been so alarmed.
I was at first.
The behavior by their colleagues, yeah.
But also it was just like, it was too fun. There were too many low-hanging stories that people were ignoring. Like 2020 was such an incredible year to write about. And so much was explicitly verboten from the mainstream. Like, you had NPR not just downplaying the Hunter Biden laptop, not just sort of saying, oh, let's put it at the bottom of the website or whatever, but saying explicitly, we are not covering this. That's pretty remarkable. So just so many basic stories were really left uncovered, and just, yeah.
Had you started noticing the liberal media going weird before you went to Seattle, but also before 2020? I mean, 2020 was the big year for this. Everyone was crazy because of COVID, but then also the sort of summer of George Floyd was such a big deal. But did you have your misgivings?
I wish I could say I did, or that I was some like early truth seeker or something. No, I was going along very happily in the flow of my community. And my community was San Francisco, gay, liberal, um, and not just all of those things, but also very prestige oriented. So being at the New York Times it was almost a religious like calling to be there. It was almost like there was no dream behind that dream. That was the dream. And being in good standing with elite culture was everything. And so, no, I hadn't questioned it much before. It had never gotten really in my way before. It had never like been an issue. I'd never felt censored by it. Yeah, and I went along with it. I mean, I think I showed the book to my wife at a certain point, and she was like, she read a chapter and she was like, Nellie, you actually come off like badly in this chapter. Are you sure you want to like say this? Like, are you sure you want to put that in print? And I was like, it's just the truth. Like, it's not like I was a heroic figure in 2018 and 2019 leading up into this at all, like by any means. So yeah, that's the truth.
It makes a really refreshing reading, actually, because it's so common for people to present themselves as Cassandras, right? Like, I always knew whatever, and you're doing that rare thing of being like, no, I was really dumb, like up until quite recently. And you write as well about like being involved in cancelling people and enjoying it, and actually totally getting why cancelling people is a thrill.
Oh yeah,
because you feel righteous and powerful and whatever. I mean, it's like it's refreshing to read someone writing about that with such candor.
Maybe too much. I mean, I maybe too much candor. Thank God the book hasn't come out, because I can still sort of pretend it's not happening, or like that I didn't write that. But yes, a lot of candor. And yeah, so no, I hadn't been like a Cassandra. I think now I see the people who were willing to be more questioning and willing to be more on the outside. And it's funny because like I think a lot of people within mainstream elite liberal society think of themselves as rebellious, or at least I certainly did. Like, I thought of myself as a sort of rebellious person, but in retrospect, like, I was doing the absolute easiest thing you can do. I was completely in the flow of my world and completely in the flow of what was going to be applauded.
It's the nature of polarization, though, isn't it? I mean, conservatives can do the same thing. Like, you frame yourself as being super rebellious, but also you have your fans who love it, you have your allies who love it. You know, it's like you can, both sides can simultaneously be persecuted and victor.
Exactly.
Which is a very satisfying combination. So
exactly. Yeah, we can all find ourselves in those bubbles, which is great now for the sort of chaotic, dissident, liberal, whatever, radical, centrist, whatever this like new world that we all trot around in and debate in and whatnot. It's slightly harder to find that because I don't know, like now I write a funny Friday column and like a news column where I sum up the news, and I always make fun of something on the right and something on the left, and it's the comment section is always mad at me about the thing I made fun of on the right or the thing I made fun of on the left. And so it's actually nice. Like there is no like safe harbor in our new sort of chaos centrism.
Yeah. And I do think that people tend to get, that is exactly the spot where you're most likely to get grief. Like Jesse Singal gets so much more aggression than I do.
Of course. Instance.
So much more.
The obsession.
Because I think he's pegged as being, he's not alone in this, but he's pegged as being an apostate, right? Someone who is still basically a liberal and absolutely votes Democrat and whatever on basically everything, except he has some quibbles about, he's not even, like, he's actually extremely moderate on the trans thing. It's basically just maybe we shouldn't like cut kids' dicks off right away. Like, it's about
maybe
as far
like one
as
or two
goes.
therapy sessions, like a conversation.
Yeah, but he's not against adult transition, or and he gets so much hatred. And I think it's because it's actually precisely those people who are most threatening, because they're most persuasive, one, to like people who might also become apostates. And also, I guess, because there's that feeling of betrayal. That if you ever read these studies showing they ask people, it's quite a funny question. They ask people, would you rather, if you're going to be killed in a car crash, like which part of your car would you least like to kill you? And basically people would
What are these questionnaires? I've never seen this in my life.
It's a strange question. Well, what's funny about it is that basically people are incredibly against being killed by their airbags. They find the idea of being killed by their airbags just really upsetting, because it's like exactly what they're not supposed to do. Whereas being killed by your steering wheel is a bit more like, well,
Where do you find this poll?
I think I read it somewhere. Paul Bloom, I think, actually, now I think about it, philosopher Paul Bloom, I think he wrote about this. And what he concluded from this question was that it's the kind of the betrayal bias. It's the feeling that you're the thing that's supposed to keep you safe should not be the thing that like hurts you. And the betrayal bias is intense. And I think that's what Jessie gets. Whereas when I like entered public life, I already like I've traveled the same journey as you, but I traveled it a while ago. And so by the time I was in public life, no one had ever pegged me as being a liberal. And so I think I got away with it.
I think it's completely right what you're saying. Like the obsession with Jessie and the obsession with someone who is on the edge of the acceptable discourse is much hotter than with a conservative. A lot of the revolution of 2020 through 2024, some argument about whether we're still in it. I keep thinking maybe it's wrapping up, and then maybe we're actually still in the middle of the night here. But a lot of the revolution really had nothing to do with left versus right. It had nothing to do with Trumpers or something like that. It was entirely a battle within liberalism. And it was entirely a battle within a battle of what are the acceptable lines of discourse within liberal society, within elite liberal society. So like cancel culture or something like that was a phenomenon. There were some situations of a conservative getting caught up in it and whatnot, but largely it was people with like, it was a professor at a liberal place who is a liberal, but he did something that was no longer within the bounds. Whatever, you can imagine. But it was really a revolution within liberal society. And it was about saying, we're moving to the left. And if you're not with us, then you're against us. And you're a fascist. And probably you're a Nazi. And probably all of this. And it was about creating division within that. So Jesse Singal, someone like that, is a huge threat. And he has to be made into a scapegoat. I imagine Jesse listening to this one day. Jesse, we're going to talk about you for about 2 hours now. He has to be made into a scapegoat. Otherwise, you'll have people not going along with the radical agenda. And the radical agenda of the day for the last 4 years was obviously defund the police, abolish the police, whatever level you want to get to. That was considered for a few years completely acceptable and normal mainstream liberal argument. And to be against that was considered radical within a place like the New York Times. Or not even against it, to be questioning of it or to report about the impact of it in anything but a positive light. And then you've got the trans topic, which of course, over the last 4 years, now I think we're starting to see the breakdown, obviously, of that grip. But for the last 4 years, it's been pediatric transition is completely acceptable. It's proven by science that this is better for the kids. Like, these are things we just don't question. And these were things that were introduced basically around 2020. And it was sort of like, this is part of the revolution now. Like, this is something you have to believe. And if you're questioning it, and if you're some old school feminist who's going to be, if you're going to like Julie Bindel this, then you're no longer part of this. So that was the revolution, really. It kind of didn't, it didn't really have anything to do with the Trumper right, which has gone through obviously its own radical changes and purification rituals and insanity, as we all know.
The right, yeah, I mean, so you can only be cancelled by your friends, right? You can't actually be cancelled by the enemy.
Yes,
Like,
exactly.
it doesn't work that way. Or you might use different terminology maybe, but we definitely wouldn't use the word cancel for that. So what you can be cancelled for is just straying a little bit outside the bounds, as you say. And I think it seems to function a bit differently on the right. It's not that it doesn't happen. I mean, I'm thinking of someone like Milo Yiannopoulos,
Oh,
who's a real blast
God.
from the past. You'll remember, yeah, but he ended up being cancelled by the right. And I think it was because
He seems like a troubled person.
yeah. And he always seemed like a troubled person. I think that was always kind of part of the brand. And he's like very funny in an odd kind of way. Have you ever read Tanya Gold's profile of Milo?
No,
Really
that sounds
good.
good.
I would
I
read Tanya
love
Gold's
her.
shopping lists. Yeah, she's
I
great.
know
And
she's so good.
and her profile of Milo was so funny, and just yeah, she just really zoomed in on his instability. But I think he ended up being cancelled by his erstwhile friends on the right for saying something flippant about paedophilia. I think because that's a sacred cow on the right, paedophilia, right?
Yeah,
And so
as
we got
it
in
should
trouble for
be.
that, if I remember correctly. But generally, it doesn't. It does seem to operate a bit differently, and I think that the left are more prone to cancellation. Now, maybe that's because the left are in power, or at least the left have more power in cultural institutions, and it's the guys in power who have the power to go around being pushing for their own agenda and demarcating what is acceptable and what isn't. And so maybe it's just a symptom of that. Like this is what people do when they're at the top of the tree.
I circulate less in real right-wing spaces, so I don't I don't know as much, but from what I can tell, there definitely is a sort of Trump related purification circle that happens where anyone who crosses outside that is, I don't know if it's canceled because I don't know what you would describe as happening to Mike Pence, but something where he is booed or called various things. But I don't totally. My mind only works in like, you know, I only know California, New York. I know the bounds of San Francisco. I know the bounds of Los Angeles. So I can't pretend to be an expert on the dynamics that are happening around what the hell is going on between Trump and Pence, or like how Trump purifies his circle. I do get a sense though that there is a kind of radicalization that happened. I don't know if it's mirrored, but when Mitt Romney becomes like a major enemy of the movement, that's kind of similar to what you see on the left of Joe Manchin or whatever.
I think you could imagine a scenario where you saw a lot more of it as well.
Yes.
If there were more cultural power on the right, basically.
Yes.
I mean, the thing is that you can't really think there are no like right-wing universities really.
I know, that's what I was trying to like.
So the idea of someone getting kicked out. I mean, historically, obviously, so McCarthyism is a sort of obvious historical analog to this. And also, what's interesting, I think, about McCarthyism in terms of the history of it is it's like the death throes of the conservative establishment. It's like immediately
that's really interesting.
1960s, where you see this really big, and I always kind of hope tentatively that that's exactly what we've seen actually with kind of the liberal version of McCarthy. I mean, it sounds so counterintuitive. The leftist version of McCarthyism it's actually a kicking out precisely because we have Trump and all these other ascendant right-wing figures. It's a sort of it's actually a symptom of fear, is my suspicion.
It kind of goes back to, is it really ending? Is the movement slowing down? And then I read something like how at UCLA they made the medical students get on the ground and pray to like anti-colonialism and put their hands on the ground. And the one guy who didn't do it, the professors went over and got his name. Like, then I read things like that and I'm like, holy shit, well, if that's still happening, like, I don't know. You sort of think that people are starting to have a sense of humor or wake up or get a little bit more reasonable.
It might just be the circles that you're moving in and that I'm moving in as well. I also sort of think of it as fairly theoretical, like it's something that happens on the internet. And then I speak to, like, you know, normie friends who say work in academia and are not very politicized at all. And they talk about how scared they are of their students.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, no, this is actually, this is everywhere.
I know. Well, it took me a long time to write the book. So it took me a few years and I kept thinking, shoot, like, this is going to feel old by the time it comes out. This is over. I kept thinking, oh gosh, now it's finally ending. Now these, everyone's waking up. And then honestly, things just kept getting kookier. I mean, it's a little bit like with the free press. When we first started this, I thought, oh, this would be we are so vulnerable if, like, the New York Times decides to be 5% less crazy. Like
That's all it would take.
Just 5% less crazy. And our whole business could go bust. And I was like, gosh, this is scary and real. And what are we going to do? What do we think about this? And then they just went and decided not to do that. They just kept getting wackier. And so, I keep thinking that there's going to be a correction, and then there doesn't seem to come one. In little microclimates, there are corrections. So, like, in the book, there's a chapter on San Francisco where I actually am very heartened by the moderate liberal corrective that's happened. And there has been a real rebellion or backlash, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, and I'm interested. I've read Michael Schellenberger's book on this as well, which
Yes.
I enjoyed. And I got to say, when I came to LA for the Free Press debate, having never been to LA, I've never been to the West Coast before.
That was your first time?
That was my first time, and I wasn't on the ground for very long either. And I was in downtown
and I wish
LA.
You'd stayed. I wish you'd stayed longer and come and hung out at the office and stuff.
Oh no, I'll have to come back and see nicer bits of LA, because I'm told that downtown LA is not a very good example. I found it, so to be fair, I had watched, have you ever seen Seven, the film?
No.
The thriller. It's a horrible, horrible film from like the 90s, and it's set in starring Brad Pitt, and it's kind of great film, but it's absolutely horrible. And it's set in LA, and it includes these really sort of there's this terrifying serial killer and whatever. I watched that on the plane for some stupid reason, and then I got to this quite dystopian looking place, and the taxi driver told me to not leave the hotel. He was like, you should just stay here. There's really no reason for you to go out on the streets. So I didn't see the sort of full zombie apocalypse scene, but I've heard and read and seen videos described of just how bad some of these homeless encampments can get, particularly in San Francisco and LA.
Yeah, I mean, the entire American West. It's in Seattle, it's in San Diego. The entire American West has been taken by a philosophy that is it's a beautiful idea, but it's so obviously wrong because of what you can just physically see with your eyes on the street. And the philosophy is that no one should be forced into treatment, and that homeless encampments are a kind of anti-capitalist battle cry, that they're a kind of almost beautiful statement about how rent needs to be lower. Not that we need to build housing, of course, but that rent needs to be lower because we need more government housing, and that that our unhoused neighbors can live in peace in the park with the housed community. Like, it's this beautiful, heady, very idealistic philosophy that everyone's going to act peaceful with each other, that people should be able to use whatever drugs they want and live wherever they want. And it's the reason I think why it's taken over the American West and why we see then the results in the street is, in part, it's left-wing, of course. It's progressive in that the ideas are all about government intervention. We need government housing. We don't need market rate housing. We need just more government housing, more government solutions. And in part, it's also a very like radically West Coast libertarian philosophy. Like it's the idea that there should be no rules around someone using drugs. There should be no rules around when that person then goes into one of those government housing, that to ask anything of them is somehow like wrong. And that's super libertarian. That's like cowboy. Because you look at Europe, which has a lot of the leftist policies around let's not put these people in jail. Let's give them treatment. Let's give them apartments. Let's give them all these things. But it also has a kind of traditional leftist set of rules also, where it's like, you have to live in a structured way to get these benefits. Whereas California, Washington, all of these places have abandoned that idea. So it's libertarianism coupled with progressive policies. And it's just created a very bizarre situation where basically in San Francisco, in LA, San Francisco, it's more visible because it's like a smaller city, more walkable. So you're really walking in these communities. You're basically told by the movement that people laying on the sidewalk and dying while you're walking past is the proper thing that should be happening. That we should not force that man to get help. That we should not get involved. Just bring him a sandwich. Make sure he has care. Maybe bring him some fresh needles. Maybe even like bring him a little fentanyl. But largely let him be in peace. Let him chill out and let him die. And that is legitimately the philosophy that the entire West side of America has been taken with. And now I think it's slowly starting to end. I mean, you see Oregon has, after decriminalizing all drugs, Oregon decided to recriminalize drugs because they just saw the overdoses, just people died. Like, this is actually a thing where I was really wrong, because growing up, I thought that made sense. Decriminalizing drugs. Why is it any of our business? And it was just so naive and so dumb. And yeah, so you're starting to see a backlash. But I mean, we phrase this always in like political terms. But if you are living in San Francisco, you just see these people. These are people who are dying, and it's like crazy making, because you're having to coerce yourself to be comfortable with that as a reality with your fellow person, which you should never have to coerce yourself to get used to that.
I complain about Britain plenty, but it is something that you don't see in Britain, really. I think because partly because it's cold. Like, one of the things that's going on here, right, is you can live outside quite happily in LA for most of the year, which you can't do in Europe generally. But I think it's also because we are just better at putting people in psychiatric institutions if they're really at that point where they can't care for themselves.
Yeah.
And seeing things, these kind of tent encampments by the side of the highway in LA, it's like proper third world energy, which did shock me as a European.
Yes. And this is a rich state. That's the thing to remember. This is not a third world situation. This is a state with a huge amount of money. And each of those people who is homeless, a huge amount of resources are actually put into them. Like, a ton of money is spent on this problem, is what I'm trying to say. And so it's not for lack of cash that it's happening. It's because the ideas are bad. It's because the plan is a bad one.
And now it's finally interacting with reality. I mean, this is the problem with being anti-traditionalist as like the basis of your ideology. Sometimes traditions are wrong about things. Sometimes material conditions change, or there's been some error, made along the way. But normally, the reason that certain ideas develop about whatever it is, homelessness, is because it's kind of there's a process of natural selection. That the good ideas are the ones that survive confrontation with reality, and the children of the summer of love, they grew up, they got their policies enacted into law, and then they confront it. Well, and they're confronting reality about now. Have you ever seen that video where a Fox News reporter goes, I think maybe to Seattle or Portland or somewhere like that, and goes, and he's going around that he's like trying to show Fox News viewers how bad everything is, and so there's all these images of like, yeah, basically these kind of zombie apocalypse images, and then they go and speak to local white liberals and try and get them to sort of comment on this, and everyone, because it's Fox, because he's got Fox written on his microphone, everyone is sort of absolutely refusing to play the game. And there's that clip you probably got to turn into a meme where a woman's saying like, but was he bothering you?
Oh, that's
When the
so
Fox
funny.
News is complaining about some guy like shooting up with fentanyl on the bus in front of some kids or something like that. But yeah, you're right. It is basically quite a libertarian idea, right? That each to their own.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh God, I can imagine that. I haven't seen that Fox clip, but I mean, then I think from the right wing media on this, there is a sort of callousness or a sort of like,
Haha, the libs have done it
yeah,
again.
like a laugh. And it's like, no, like in part, this is a national crisis that's happening. Whatever. I can ramble about this forever, but yeah, I think keeping our humanity, like when I see conservative media go and just roll cameras and make viral videos of people on the street in their worst moments dying and in just total decay, that also just makes me really sad. Like that's dark. That's there's got to be just there has to be a reasonable, moderate, centrist solution to this. But yeah, so in the book I write about that a bit, and kind of the hellish situation you're in when you're asked to ignore that suffering on a daily basis, which most people living in the West Coast are asked to ignore it. And I think we effectively do. Like, I think, especially in San Francisco for a long time, all the people who say to themselves that they're so compassionate and so bleeding heart and all this stuff just effectively ignored that the policy that sounded like a good idea was a really bad idea. And I think a lot of the stuff from the last few years is based on really beautiful ideas. Like, abolish the police is a very beautiful notion. And it's based on the idea that I think is truly held by a lot of people, which is that people will only hurt each other if they're suffering because of capitalism or patriarchy or white supremacy, that without those forces, people will be good and they will be kind and they will be honest and they won't steal and all of these things. I mean, you read the writings from people who want to abolish the police about what the world will look like once the police are abolished. And it's like this utopian poetry. It's like gorgeous. And what they managed to do then is say that anyone who doesn't believe in this is kind of a monster because you think that people are inherently bad. You think that even if people have money, they still might steal. Which anyone who's been around rich people knows. People with money love to steal. It's like such a silly idea, but that it's based in profound utopian philosophy.
And I think that's probably one of the things that fuels the cancel culture energy, right? I mean, I don't want to present it as a purely leftist thing. I think it isn't. I think that this instinct exists on the right as well. But one difference I think in general between the right and the left, to generalize, is that the right are more likely to think that their opponents are stupid, and the left are more likely to think that their opponents are evil. There are exceptions. There are some people on the right who really do paint leftists as evil, which I just don't find plausible. I mean, not least because I went to one of the most left-wing universities in the world. You know, I come from a very I know loads of people still do who believe this stuff. They're not evil. I think they probably are just a bit stupid. Like, that's basically in the nicest possible way.
To my cousin Theodore, you're just dumb.
Well, they're not listening, so it's fine. I can say this stuff. But I think that it's almost always, as you say, motivated by sincere utopian thinking that just hasn't confronted reality, and a degree of tribalism as well, just kind of crowding out anything that might disrupt your way of thinking, whatever. And the attitude towards the right tends to be, and I've had these conversations with left-wing friends and family, is basically the only possible explanation for why the right think like they do is because they're bad. It's because
Yeah.
they just lack human feeling, like kind of the worst possible characterization
Yeah.
that you could make of someone.
That they lack
And if you
compassion, that they want people to
yeah.
suffer.
And if you think that, then cancellation is a completely reasonable response.
Yeah. Like with, let's say, pediatric transition, which is just one of the chapters in the book, but is such an interesting topic, especially right now in light of the reports, although whatever, this podcast will come out later. But it is a beautiful idea to think that young children know themselves completely and know what's in their hearts and can make decisions that will make sense for the rest of their lives. And to say otherwise is to say, no, I don't trust them. They don't know what they're talking about. A 12-year-old has no idea what they're talking about. Like they don't, and it's to sort of deny part of, as a progressive would say, is to deny part of their humanity and autonomy. And it certainly is. And so I think on the left, the thinking of anyone who would not be for pediatric transitions is that you're denying these children's humanity, that you're not trusting them, that you don't care about their feelings. And
do you want them to commit suicide?
And that you want them to commit suicide.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's all the fake studies that are trotted out and whatnot that don't say that at all. But yeah, I think it's truly held.
Tell me about how your views changed on trans. So 2020 is like your the year that you peak, right? On things like abolish the police.
I don't know that my views changed on trans so much as like I had never considered the possibility of medical transitions for children as like something that I was supposed to agree with. Like I grew up as a feminist gay woman who was very gender nonconforming, especially as a child. Like I played with trucks. I dressed in what you would consider boys' clothes, or I was always very sort of clearly a little gay kid. Like you would look at me and you'd be like, yeah, she'll probably grow up to be a lesbian. I had this voice like from a young age. And so until about 4 or 5 years ago, it never occurred to me that you would look at a kid like that and say, maybe you're not a girl. And maybe you should have hormones that stop your. It never occurred to me. It wasn't part of the gay conversation really in mainstream gay life, like at all. And obviously trans adults were always, and that I haven't changed. I think it's great and people should do what they want. And I think there should be laws against discriminating against trans people in workplaces, all of those things. Like I still like that, want that. But I think the only thing that changed for me with the pediatric trans topic is at first, I was really scared to touch it as a topic. I was very scared to write about it or talk about it because it felt like, okay, is this the next step in the progressive march? Like the march of progress got me a lot. It got me the right to vote. It got me the right to have a credit card. It got me the right to marry a woman. It got me the right to be pregnant, as you know.
Well, we've always had the right to be pregnant.
No, but you know,
the manner of your
the right to buy sperm online is what I'm trying to say.
Right, that's what I was alluding to. Yeah.
Which is a wild right that 40 years ago would be considered like pretty radical. So part of me, I think, was always nervous to touch this topic, or has been nervous the last few years, because who am I to stand here and say now progress has to stop? if I'm told.
And you don't want to go to the other side as well, right?
Yeah, of course.
Because you would feel unwelcome. So just crossing the floor is also not attractive.
No, and I
a
also
possible
just I
option.
don't want to be in a tribal system of politics. But anyway, but I think that what changed was just like seeing how big this was getting, seeing how it was not just a few fringe cases. This was an enormous thing that was happening and being encouraged for a lot of young people and a lot of gender conforming young people. So to me, it felt a little bit like here you're taking just a gender conforming young woman and telling her that she's not a woman and telling her that she should have a double mastectomy and that she should take hormones that make her never fully get the bone density she should have. Like these are the fact that this became mainstream, the fact that our president is still pushing these ideas is to me like mind-boggling. When you describe it, it's mind-boggling. And I at this point I refuse the idea that that's the next step in the march of progress. I think it's actually extremely regressive. I think it's actually like reifying gender identities and in gender sort of splits in this like really kind of regressive way. And so I reject the idea that it is progressive at all. And that's kind of where I've come out on it, I think. I don't know where you are on it, but for kids, it's just, I don't think we should sterilize little kids who don't fit into gender norms, and they should be able to make their choice when they're 18, which is the maybe arbitrary age, but it's the age we've decided is when kids become adults and they can make choices and they can get tattoos and they can join the army and they can do whatever they want with their bodies.
The episode is not over. There is another maybe 30 minutes of content, but it is behind a paywall. If you would like access to that content, if you would like to show support for the show, paid subscriptions are what keep it on the road. Allow me to pay my producers, put food on the table, all that important stuff. The extended version of the podcast is available at my Substack, louiseperry.substack.com. That's where you can also find, as I say every week, bonus episodes, extended episodes, the MMM chat community, all of this. Please sign up for a paid subscription. It makes such an enormous difference to my ability to keep producing the podcast and grow it even bigger, produce more episodes, all that good stuff. There are other ways that you can show your support for the show as well. You can rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. You can like us on YouTube. You can tell your friends and family how much you like the show. If you find it valuable, all of these things make an enormous difference to our ability to keep making it. Thank you so much.